let them in as we go. So I believe, guys, you can all see what I need you to see right now. So the aim of tonight is simple, okay? What we are here for is to essentially show you guys the exact three key system that I use myself personally and have used to transform my own physique, drop 20 kilos, and what I now use in my current clients to allow them to also drop 20 plus kilos, rebuild their energy, get leaner, stronger. And I think the main key with this is all this sounds fantastic, right? And if we all live in a box with no interference from the outside world, it's all possible. But that isn't how life works. It has to be inclusive of your life. So we don't want to overhaul it. We don't want to essentially end up just cutting out the foods that we enjoy, or even more so, where I probably see one of the biggest issues is trying to train like someone who has unlimited time, all the time in their day, no pressure, no responsibility, and then wondering ultimately why things don't stick, right? So that is essentially what we are here to figure out. So here is exactly where we're going for the next 90 minutes. First 60, we are going to run through the three key system in as much detail as humanly possible. Then we are going to move on to an open Q&A. So any questions, please save them until the end, and we will answer any and all as we run through. So the three key system itself is the framework that I use and that my client coaching clients currently use. Second, why discipline has not been your problem, because from all the chats I've had over the years, everyone at this stage has tried 5, 10, 15 different plans. But you are not the variable that's been failing, as we can so easily blame ourselves that we must be the issue, that we just can't seem to stick to, we can't seem to be disciplined, and we just never seem to get the results that we feel we should. And then third, what 12 weeks could realistically look like for you in your schedule with specific constraints. So just stick with me. This will be worth your evening, and we can guarantee that by the very end, you will have the exact system you need to get things moving forward. So here is the question that I want you to sit with tonight. It isn't going to be how do I lose 10 kilos? It's not what diet should I try next? The real question is this. It is why is it that you, who likely wins in every other area of your life, cannot consistently apply what you already know to your own body and your own lifestyle? Because at this stage, we all know what to eat. We know more or less how to train. We know sleep matters. So ultimately, why does the plan keep collapsing? And that is what I'm going to answer tonight. Because as we know, and I'm sure we'll all agree, information has never been as abundant as it currently is. Logic would dictate that with how much information is readily available, it should be even easier to work towards these things, but it isn't the case. And that is essentially what we are going to figure out tonight and cut through. So, if you are like most of the guys that I work with, you probably told yourself one of these things. I just need more discipline. I'm just too busy right now. I'll start when things calm down. Maybe my metabolism is just different at this age or as I get older. And I've tried everything, but nothing works for me specifically. And every one of these, which we're all familiar with, is wrong. And you might ask, well, Lee, it's all well and good saying this, but how? And it's not because you're wrong about yourself. It is because the framing is wrong. So tonight I'm going to show you exactly what's happening. It's going to be a very, very logical approach and ultimately help and shine the light on where these potential downfalls have crept in and how, even more importantly, how we address them. So what I want you guys to do now, if you could, so if you could just type in the chat, guys, and just let me know which one of these that you have told yourself most recently. And look, there's no judgment here. Just be honest. I'm curious to see. So the number two, where we have let's start property when things calm down, absolutely. And I'm sure you'll agree as well, Owen, if there's one thing we can probably guarantee in life is that it only gets busier. And well, that's just what we need to figure out. How do we work around it? So, Mark, would you mind muting if at all possible, please? Perfect. Thank you. So we're all familiar with these. We know exactly how it sounds. We know exactly what the script goes like. And this leads me on to my next point. So this is essentially the structure that I'm going to teach you. It is the three keys. Sorry, Mark, just kind of have you on speaker again, if you wouldn't mind muting. I think we are good to go. So, like I was saying, these are the three keys. And key one, we have the performance nutrition method. And this is why most of the men typically end up eating more that I work with on this system, and they still end up losing body fat. And again, this one might come as a bit of a surprise, but the vast majority of people that I have come across, especially over the past 6 to 12 months, it has been under eating has been more the issue than overeating. And again, that it's an easier one to address because we typically tend to get more food on board. We generally tend to get the best of both worlds as we also see progress. It also links into key number two, which is what I call the minimum effective dose protocol. So this is essentially a 45-minute training formula that outperforms training perfectly 6 days a week. Because as we know, it's all well and good having a perfect plan on paper, but if we only get half it done this week, none of it done next week, and then we fall off track the week after, it doesn't really matter. It's all about finding what is consistent and understanding how exactly we implement these different aspects. And on the aim of consistency, we have key number three, which is the consistency breakpoint toolkit. This is essentially the structural shift that replaces willpower with protocol. So ultimately, the reason this finally holds and why you potentially keep self-sabotaging, why you end up starting over every Monday, and why you never feel you can stick to a certain approach, a certain way of life, a certain adaptation. This is ultimately what we are going to uncover over the next 60 minutes. So what makes these three keys different from everything else you've read or tried is, and like I mentioned earlier, is that they're not about more information. You don't need more information. I'm sure I could ask any one of you and you can tell me all about nutrition and training and how it typically should look and what needs to be done. So we know information isn't the issue. What we essentially need to identify and build is a system that turns the information you currently have, of which we all have plenty, into the behavior that you already know you want. That's the key. And that's what the next hour is about. Knowing, turning into doing. And again, it's simple in concept, but there is a lot of foundations behind it as to why it works. But before we dive in, just to give you a small bit of insight into me, who I am, where I've come from, and why I can even help you with this in the first place. So back a long time ago at this stage, I used training to save my life at 18. It was probably the only saving grace, the only thing that got me through at that time. But as they say, out of the darkest times come the best rewards. And that is ultimately what led me on the path I'm on. Initially, starting off on the physical side of things, I had built and ran a gym for 4 years. So again, have ran through a lot of different versions of myself. And this wasn't done in what people would have you think a nice, tidy, organized structure. It was in the middle of absolute chaos. It was in the middle of figuring life out, figuring out the direction of where I need to go to. Now, alongside this, from a physical standpoint, I went from 65 kilos, severely underweight, to be quite honest, to 85 kilos of off fat. And I'm sure we all can relate to having run through these cycles in the past where there's just no structure. From there, I stripped it all back, built the muscle, rebuilt the body properly, where I'm now actually sitting back up just at that weight, leaner, stronger, and the most in control I've ever been. So now I use this system to implement with other men so that we can essentially deliver those results, that we can get them to the place that they know they should be. And again, it's not just about the physical. I personally feel, and a lot of the guys I work with will echo this, it's about pride. It's about just upholding our own standards and ultimately part of being what a man is. And this, again, it leads on quite nicely. So before we go any further, I want to be direct with you that it isn't you. And if that's the only message you guys take away from tonight, then that is job well done, in my opinion. The reason that every plan has collapsed is not because you lack discipline. It's not because your drive isn't there. It's not because your metabolism is broken. It's not because you're too busy. Like that, oh, what I know you mentioned with life slowing, with life never slowing down. It's because the plans that you were operating on were not built for the life you have and the conditions that you're operating under. So we're talking high output, high pressure, an unpredictable schedule, decision fatigue, and you can't simply outdiscipline a plan that was designed for someone living a completely different life. And that is the key, because how often have we maybe followed something a friend has advised us to do, something we've seen online, and from day one, it's a chore. We have to try extremely hard to even make some level of progress. That isn't necessarily the way it should be. What is likely needed is just more structure, more stability, and essentially more time management. And that is the reframe. So what we need to do now is we need to essentially have a look at how this works. So, what we need to do is here is the shift in thinking that changes everything. And it is the foundation that everything else rests on tonight. Most, most of the men I work with come in believing this. If I just had more motivation, I could get my body where I want it. And that belief is the single biggest reason that every plan has failed. Because motivation, it isn't the variable. You're running a high output most of the time. If we look at every other aspect of life, this correlates. And the idea that you'll reliably summon motivation at 9 p.m. after a long day, maybe you've been on shift, maybe you haven't had a break, however this looks, for what is typically what we call it a salad and a workout is it's delusional. No one is going to function there. And the ones that do typically don't end up getting anything except burnout. So to me, that isn't a motivation problem. It might seem it from the outside, but it isn't. It is a design problem. And here's the shift. Like men such as yourself don't run on motivation. They run on systems. And the best example of this, to be quite honest, is if we all look at how we work, if we all look at the decisions we make in our day that have ultimately led us to where we are in our careers, in our life, families, whatever it happens to be, you don't perform this because you feel motivated to on that day. You perform because you have protocols, you have hierarchies, you have decision trees that essentially fire whether you feel like it or not. And the crazy thing is, the fix for your body is the exact same. We don't need more motivation. We don't give you more motivation. We give you a system that runs whether motivation is there or not. And this is the key. If we all only did work and went to work and however it was when we were motivated, we would spend most of our time at home doing nothing. And that is the truth. And we can all relate to this. So again, just if this resonates with you and you can relate, just drop a simple yes in the chat if you wouldn't mind, just so I can get an idea of where you guys are at. Yeah, great stuff, Owen. And again, it's what we tell ourselves the whole time. And it is just a case of understanding where this thought process comes from, but even more so understand that we're not broken. There's nothing to actually fix per se. Again, when we look at other aspects of life, we see that we have the performance we need. It just potentially is misguided, misaligned for the areas that don't necessarily stack up. So practically, what this means is we stop asking, how do I get more motivated? And start asking, what systems run my body the way that I run everything else that matters? Because that is the question that we need to be able to answer by the end of this workshop. And it's the question that I'm going to walk you through with my clients, the men who have been exactly where you are. So, first of all, I want to introduce you to Dave. Dave was 45 years old when he first started with me. So he was at a point where he thought he was too old to do anything. That was it. It was just game over. He was also managing multiple jobs. He was a family man. He was traveling roughly 22 days a month. And when he came to me, he was 109 kilos. He was 40% body fat. He was training, and this is the crazy part. He was training 6 days a week. but he was exhausted by 3 p.m. every single day. And this is the disconnect. He had been with different personal trainers in the past, but never managed to last more than 8 weeks. He had tried every fitness app that was on the market at the time, and for 2 years he made zero progress. He had all the effort, but there was nothing tangible coming on the other side. And to me personally, if the effort is being put in, I think it's criminal not to be getting results from it because the hardest part is the doing of all these things and the getting started. So what we did with Dave was we changed three things. So we actually built his food up. We calibrated him up to 2,300 calories on his heavy work days, and we anchored protein. And that was it from a nutrition perspective. We were quite flexible in how he was approaching it, depending on the facilities that he had at his availability and what he could actually manage. Because again, a realistic approach was the only thing that was going to work here. From a training perspective, we built him a 45-minute strength block. It was 3 times a week, and it was locked to a calendar that he couldn't move. So we didn't leave it optional. It was never something that he had to just fit in. It was something that was given the same priority as the work he did, as the time he put aside for his family because we know if we were to give any less of a distinction to it, it's simply not going to happen as the previous 2 years had alluded to. So the result was very clear, as we can see. So he was down 18 kilos, eating more than he ever had. And as we can see, and Owen, I feel this one it might be quite relevant to you. He said, I always thought I just did not have time. And that, I think, is the thing. He was completely bottlenecked, or he thought he was. But it was because all the effort was going, it was misguided, it was misaligned. So as we can see here, just a small bit more insight into Dave. So 18 kilos down, he was 40% body fat to 18. And then he was eating the foods he enjoyed. He wasn't giving up time with his family. He wasn't living on a military strict diet by any means. There were some weeks where maybe he trained a small bit less. But again, it was realistic. And the big thing was that he stayed in the game to get the results. And I think that's one thing we can't just overstate enough because, like we said, we can have the perfect plan, but that's all well and good if we're gone after 6 weeks. An imperfect plan, imperfect action is going to do much more for you if that's something you can sustain for the next 5 to 10 plus years. Because realistically, when we start, we don't want to stop and we shouldn't have to, regardless of what life throws our way. We can flex, we can move, we can facilitate to some capacity. And this is what we did with Dave. You got him training less, not more. And this is ultimately what happens when we get the body running on systems and we're not relying on motivation. If we had left it to motivation with Dave, he would have lasted all of about 2 weeks with his schedule. And there's no point kind of beating around the bush with that either. And again, the crazy thing was we all get stuck on motivation and having it or not having it. Motivation oftentimes comes from doing. We all think that we should magically just be motivated to do something, but it isn't the case. We start doing something, it's tough at the beginning. We start getting motivated as it becomes more second nature, as we start getting the results. That's where motivation sticks in. And that is essentially one of the missing links. And Dave isn't alone. So as you can see here, we have Adam. He was 40 years old, business owner. He was always on. He was running his own company, always learning, always building. He's 102 kilos, 34% body fat. He had low energy, disconnected, and he was physically stuck while everything else in his life moved forward. That's a frustrating place to be. When you operate at such a high level in every other aspect of life, and the one aspect that you get a reminder of every single time you look in the mirror is not where it needs to be is unbelievably frustrating. And the gap here with Adam between who he was and how he looked had simply started to wear on him. So he had his all or nothing thinking. He had habits that fell apart in the road, as we can imagine. Alcohol filled the gaps. Again, if we aren't happy, it's very easy to lean towards other things for a substitute for this happiness, for this dopamine, essentially. And every plan that he had tried to collapse the moment life got difficult. So with Adam, there was no fancy setup. He literally trained out of the shed with a barbell, with dumbbells. He walked whenever he could fit it in. He started finding opportunities in his day to squeeze in just downtime that he could devote to it. And again, sometimes it was only 10 minutes, it was only 5 minutes, but it was a cumulative effect over weeks and over months. When he traveled, he always made sure there was a gym on site or close by. And even more so, if there wasn't, he had a contingency, whether it was bodyweight movements, whether it was having bands on standby. So you're kind of getting a bit of an idea of what the approach is. It's just consistency. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that is the key. So he ate strategically, in fairness, when we got his nutrition dialed in and we aligned it to his environment. And 12 weeks, we went from 102 kilos down to 90 kilos. And now it's automatic. We jump into Alex. He's a project manager, quantity surveyor. He lost 12 kilos, apologies, in 12 weeks. And his words to me were that simply joining the Apex Accelerator was the most transformative step he'd ever taken for his health. And then James, finance practice owner, he lost 10 kilos across 12 weeks. And the main takeaway I want you to get from this is that you're not alone. You're not broke. Different people, different lives, but they have the same outcome. And I think that is the key. That is the difference. And even more so, I want you to hear this clearly as well, that the men you saw here, they're not exceptional, not by any means. They're not more disciplined than you. They're not less busy than you, by all means. They're not luckier. What they have is the right formula, the right system, and it was applied in the right sequence for the body and the life that they were actually living, rather than this ideal scenario of how things should look. And that's essentially what I'm going to teach you. The three keys in order right now. So, key number one, we have the performance nutrition method. So, this is essentially flexible nutrition. It's built for your schedule and it's not against it. So, over the next 15 minutes, we're going to cover, well, exactly what this is and why every restriction-based plan has collapsed. So, the three phases that we work through is going to be calibrate, anchor, and flex. And we're actually going to use Dave as a bit of a case study to show how he applied this to drop the 18 kilos. So what it actually is. The performance nutrition method is not a diet as such. It is a calibration framework. And what I mean by this is if we think back to any approach we've tried in the past, most plans will start by removing things. So if we think keto, low carb, fasting, which removes time, low calorie removes food, but calibration starts by measuring what is your actual maintenance, where is your protein floor, and what is sustainable across a demanding week. And then we adjust the amounts. We never adjust the categories. I think this is something that becomes a major pitfall is most people don't realize that food categories shouldn't change. If we find an approach that works and it gets results, then that needs to be consistent. It is just simply the amounts that we adjust. And I think even more importantly, for me, nutrition has two things that it has to tick. It has to fuel performance, first and foremost, but in equal parts, it has to fuel enjoyment. So we want you eating food that you enjoy in the right quantities and the right patterns for the week you're actually having, in spite of all the time constraints, whether it's on the road, whether you don't have the facilities, the amenities, maybe there's more food out than in. That's all workable. It is just comes down to having everything calibrated to understand what the allowances are. So this is essentially why every restriction-based plan has collapsed for you in the past. We have keto, where we are trying to maintain ketosis, which is essentially the state we get into across a work trip, a chaotic week, or a family dinner, which then we know is not possible. We have intermittent fasting, which can work. I will admit it can work, but all we need is one unpredictable stretch where everything goes against us, whether it's work, whether it's family, it's other responsibilities, and that is that window destroyed. We have 12 calorie, 100 calorie days where your energy crashes by 3 p.m. and you still have plenty of work left in the day. We have carnivore, cabbage soup, canteen salad on repeat. But the problem is these are all just quick fixes. These are all beliefs that we think is going to deliver us a very, very quick and easy win. Again, you might think back, and when I say it, you might even kind of trigger some instances for yourselves in the past. How often have you attempted a certain diet, a certain meal plan, a certain way of eating, only to lose it a couple of weeks later, only to lose it when you have your first social event. And I'm sure we can all relate. I know once upon a time that was exactly the position I was in. And then that creates its own stress because you feel like you're being pulled so far off where you need to be. And this is the issue. So they all rely on a calm, controlled environment. But I don't think any of us can probably attest to having one of these. It is very rare that someone can have such a settled environment that none of this has any actual bearing. But the performance nutrition method, by contrast, is calibration based. So, like I mentioned, we adjust amounts, we don't adjust categories, and more importantly, it holds when everything else is trying to pull you left, not just when life is easy and life is perfect. So, phase one, we have calibrate. So, before we can look into anything, what we need to do is we need to calculate the actual energy that your body burns in the life you actually live. It's not just a generic calculator, assuming a standard day, a standard 9 to 5. We need to build a calculation accounting for your output, your stress load, and your actual activity profile of your standard day. This becomes your maintenance number. Every other variable gets built on top of this. And the issue is, if we get this wrong, everything else is just going to compound the error. And this is where most men that I work with are not overeating. They're simply undercalibrated. For this reason alone, if we don't know where we should be, then we've no way of quantifying, we've no way of tracking. And as I'm sure we'll all agree, the data is what's going to drive decision making, and the data is what drives results. Without it, we're just guessing. And while we can get lucky for sure, it's never going to be a long-term sustainable method. And then what this does is it links in quite nicely to phase two, which is our anchor phase. So once we know your maintenance, we need to anchor protein. We set a protein floor that protects your muscle mass, your energy, and your satiety through the back end of a long day. Like that, I'm sure we can all relate to having instances of we get to the end of the day and we just eat all around us and we just can't seem to stop. We might attribute this to a willpower thing, whereas in reality, it is likely just a domino effect of different things that we're missing throughout the day. So, what we need to do is, and what this means for most men, in fact, is you're talking roughly zero point 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of target body weight distributed across as many meals as you can feasibly manage in your day. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. And it's just anchoring the one variable that matters most. Everything else is going to flex around it. This is ultimately what stops your 3 p.m. energy crashes, and it's what keeps your metabolism in a position that it keeps it intact across a deficit. As we know, we've all heard of how metabolism can slow down as we get older. It is true to a degree, but not to as much of a degree as we would all be led to believe. Your metabolism doesn't slow down as substantially as the lifestyle factors and the change in your lifestyle factors influence it. So they are the big hitters. And phase three, we have flex, where we now need to flex everything else. So we're talking your carbs, your fats, your meal timing, your total calories. And these, again, have to be built around your real week. So a heavy work week looks one way, a travel week might look another, a lighter weekend is going to look different again. So, but the aim is simple. The system just needs to bend to your life. Your life does not bend to the system. We shouldn't have to say no to every single outing that we come across. We shouldn't have to live in the fear of undoing progress or damage control. Your life is something we all have to get fulfillment from. We shouldn't be in a position, the majority of the time, that we have to feel miserable doing something like this. Ultimately, I believe if we are miserable in any sort of approach when it comes to nutrition and your health, it's not sustainable. From day one, it's not going to last. I think that is something that a lot of us we can mistake because we're all well aware we can just throw ignorance at it. We can just outwork the misery and still get results. That's all well and good until we hit that bottom line. So this is ultimately the difference between something that lasts and something that collapses 4 weeks in. So Dave, again, this is what it looked like. When we first met, he was eating around 1,400 calories and he was stalling. So we calibrated him to his real maintenance, essentially increasing intake 2,300 in high output days. We anchored protein. And we flexed everything else around travel days, his long days, family days, and we stopped this cut and crash cycle, which he'd found ourselves in for years, trying to massively restrict, not making progress, going backwards and stepping back into that same cycle, never making any progress. And that is the issue. So as we can see the result here, as again, as mentioned, 18 kilos down, eating more, not less. And his own words, he's eaten more food in his program than he had in the entire year before. And it's the only thing that's actually worked. And that is contrary to every belief he had around food, around his nutrition. And I would be fairly confident in taking a wager that quite a lot of men fall into this category. Oftentimes we think we can just eat less and get to progress. Whereas in reality is what we don't realize, we are quite complex organisms. We need energy, we need fuel. If we have a lot of mental decisions in our day, if we are constantly switched on, that has a massive nutritional burden. We actually need a certain level of extra consumption of calories and carbohydrates to fuel cognitive function. Again, it's not something that we would be extremely aware of. So this ultimately leads into key number two, which is the minimum effective dose protocol. So this is the 45-minute training framework that is built for men with high demands, no time to waste, and I would say quite likely broken sleep, as it is always the first thing that goes. So over the next 15 minutes, this is what we are going to cover. Why 6 days a week training fails every single time, what strength training fixes that cardio can't, and the three components, again, following a similar framework as key one. We have compound, we have overload, and we have steps. And then we're going to have a look at how one of our clients applied this. So what this actually is, the minimum effective dose protocol is the smallest amount of training that produces the body composition result you want. For most men I work with, that's going to be somewhere in the region of 2 to 4 short sessions a week, 45 minutes each, focused on mainly compound strength movements, getting max return from essentially minimum investment. So, and that's it. There's no 2 hour sessions. We're not training 6 days a week. There's no hit until we vomit. It's three focus sessions. We track them, we progress them, and that is as simple as it needs to be. Again, what we need is we need consistency over the long haul. Like we discussed, perfection is a fantastic term, oftentimes not achievable, and is very much the case here as well. So, why does this work when 6 days a week training fails? And this is because, very simply, high volume programs assume an environment you do not have. So, your output is high, you're sleep deprived, you have decision fatigue, your recovery is already under pressure, and your cortisol is likely already elevated from the intensity of the day, the week, potentially even the weeks and months on end. So adding more volume on top of this doesn't build muscle. It really isn't a case of more work means more progress here. Because again, how often do we burn out? And we want to really shift away from the volume and quantity based thinking to more towards quality. So all it does is just deepens the deficit. It drives the recovery deficit further, which means we have a larger climb out of the hole, essentially. So the minimum effective dose protocol works because it does the least that your body needs to drive a body composition change, and no more. And that is it. And that is actually quite a hard concept for most people to grasp is we don't need to anymore. We just need to do what we have aligned, and we just need to do it efficiently. That is the aim of the game. Efficiency is always going to win. It respects, most importantly, the recovery debt that your body and your job is already in and creating. Because, like I said, we're not building on a calm baseline. We're building on a high output, turbulent one where we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. We don't know where we're going to be next week. So, yes, all well and good saying we can train 4, 5, 6 days a week until we can't. Well, what happens then? Typically, and I'm sure we can all relate to this, it's either we do everything or we do nothing. And the problem is that's we can't progress off this. So phase one in the minimum effective dose protocol is compound focus, where each session is built around the 5 compound patterns. We have your squat, your hinge, your press, your pull, and your carry. These movements on their own deliver 80% of the fat loss and muscle preservation result for what is approximately 20% of time investment. So it's a win-win. we get max output, minimal time. So most of the men I work with, like I mentioned, they fall within the realm of kind of 2 to 4 sessions per week. And a lot of them, in fact, will flex. So some weeks they might get more, some weeks they'll get a bit less. But what we always do is we have a ceiling and we have a floor. The ceiling is where we aim to operate at as much as we possibly can. We know it's not always possible. So then on those weeks we have a floor. And once we're not lower than the floor, then we're happy. We've still made progress. And what I kind of look at it is if we can look at 52 weeks of a year and we can say that for every week we've had that we've either taken a step forward or we've held steady. That's a pretty damn good result for 52 weeks' time. It means you've never taken a step backwards. So in that perspective, it doesn't matter how quick, I would say, progress or results come or don't come because we're always moving forward. And again, this is why this is always going to outperform people train double the volume because with this approach, we have the volume in the right place. And this leads in quite nicely to phase two, which is your progressive overload. So this is paramount. And again, it is something I have seen to be a major issue. A lot of the guys I work with, they come to me and they don't know what they do in the gym. They know they might have a list of movements. They couldn't tell me the weight, they couldn't tell me the reps. But what we need to do to be able to ensure this approach works, we need to be able to quantify the progress, the work that is being done. So we track your lifts, we add weight or we add reps for every session we can, because this is going to be the variable that drives muscle preservation, your metabolic rate, and visible body composition change. There is no magic exercise. There is no magic program. There is intensity and there's progressive overload and there's consistency. If we have those three things in play over the course of 5 years, 10 years, however long we're talking, progress comes and it comes likelihood easier than it ever has before. So the reason that a strength program works while a random gym session does not is just this, because we can track it. And like I said, most of the guys I've worked with have never tracked a single thing in their life. But once the numbers go up, the body follows. So if you can't tell me what you lifted last week, we're not training, we're just exercising. And again, you might say, well, isn't that still a good thing? Absolutely. For the health benefits alone, for sure. But again, if we're putting the effort in, we need to get results, especially if we are goal oriented and we have something to work towards. It is paramount, it's criminal not to. So again, this finishes quite nicely, and might be an alternative view for most of you. But phase three is where we actually look at steps as recovery. So instead of adding in formal cardio, we just use a simple daily step target, 7 to 10,000 steps a day. That average generally tends to deliver a pretty good return on investment. When we start pushing higher, and we might naturally with how our work is scheduled, and that's absolutely fine. That links back to the nutrition method that we just need to have all these different aspects aligned. But again, walking is recoverable first and foremost. So if we have a busy day, we've minimal time, we are training heavy, we're training hard, we can move, we can still walk. It's also family friendly. It can happen on a phone call, it can happen on a travel day, it can happen between meetings. And it delivers the cardiovascular benefits, but also the fat loss benefits that we need that we all think we get from cardio. But, and this is key, it does not have the same recovery cost. It does not have the same cortisol cost. So every man that I work with will build steps into their day and they will try implement them around things they were already doing. They will look at potentially different actions and habits in their day and we look at what we can attach to it. So there's no having to overhaul a lifestyle or a routine. Rather, let's look at what we're doing. Can we optimize? Can we add to what's there? Can we build upon the foundation? 9 times out of 10, we can and it makes it the barrier to entry is so much lower. So it is zero at a time. We have a significant added result. And the best cardio, I believe, for a high performing man is the one that doesn't feel like cardio, the one that just gets done. And what I want to do now is I want to show you how we applied the minimum effective dose protocol with John. So John's 34 years old. He's in the army. He's at management level. But and interestingly enough, he was a man who had always identified as a high achiever and performer. But when he came to me, as we can see on by this left picture, the standards had dropped. So we installed essentially the minimal effective dose protocol where we had compound movements, progressive overload track session by session, and we built steps into his operational days. That was the key. We pulled back the volume, we dialed in his recovery, and we built a training structure that his schedule could actually sustain rather than one that we ideally thought it needed to be. And the result, as we can see here, is 91 down to 82 kilos. 28% body fat stripped back to 14, and consistently performing at the top across every fitness metric. And again, in similar kind of thought process here, he said to me that he always thought he needed to train more, not less. But the opposite was true, because that is the lie we've been fed, that more will be all we need. But there comes the point where more doesn't scale, it doesn't exponentially grow, that we have to dive into the quality side of things. Quality work, as we know, I'm sure we've all seen it in our own day to day. Quality work wins time after time. So the thing with this is that the system runs even when everything else is on fire. And that is the key. If we can essentially design a system and almost reshape the mind to a point that regardless of what our week throws at us, regardless of how our life looks, we still have our minimum targets, I would say, are non-negotiables that get hit regardless, that still keep us moving forward. Like I said before, we either maintain or we take a step forward. And how this is all tied together is with key number three, which is the consistency breakpoint framework. So this is the behavioral architecture that holds everything together, which is necessary for a high output life. There's no arguments. If we don't have this structure in play, everything else is just going to crumble. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to explain why willpower fails specifically, how we can apply structural design to our body, the same way we apply it to our work, our profession, our careers, whatever we do, and the three components: anchor, habits, and trigger maps, identity layer. And then what it looks like when motivation is no longer required, which again is the saving grace where we all want to get to. So the consistency breakpoint toolkit is the behavioral architecture that makes the nutrition and the training run automatically. It's not a mindset thing, it's not a motivation thing. It is the same kind of structural design that you already use to operate at your best in other areas of your life. So again, we have anchors, we have triggers, we have pre-decided protocols that we apply now to your body and your week. So this is essentially the layer that most of us miss, but it's also what turns our typical 4 week burst into more of a 12-month change. Okay. And then most plans, as we know, on average, will fail in week four. And the reason for this is it's not always because the plan is bad, right? There are cases where it simply is, but generally it is more so because there's nothing architectural in nature holding it together when life gets hard, when a demanding period hits, when sleep gets cut, when stress spikes. There's nothing protecting this behavior, so it simply collapses. And the issue with this then is that the consistency breakpoint toolkit is what prevents this collapse. So we build the architecture before we need it. So sequencing is something that we're quite big on. Rather than looking at an incident of something that happened or didn't happen, I'll just use nutrition as an example where we hit targets or we didn't. Is there a sequence of events leading up to it that we can potentially implement that will allow us to basically beat it without having to worry too much? If we can catch things early, then the likelihood it's a much lower friction. Willpower isn't as required, essentially. So we make the next decision before that moment requires it. We treat your body the same way that we treat your most important commitments. You might remember with Dave, we anchored in his training sessions. So we just need a pre-decided protocol that fires whether you feel like it or not. Because if, like I said, if we only ever listen to our emotions and motivation, we're never going to get anywhere, truly, as we all know. I would say arguably there's more times we feel demotivated, unmotivated than motivated. And if we listen to those emotions and let them drive, then there's no outcome. There's no positive, favorable outcome in this aspect. So our phase one here is where we anchor habits. And I've already touched on this slightly in terms of how we implement more steps and movement in the day. But we want to attach new behaviors to the things you're already doing every single day. So we're not trying to create a whole new routine. We're not trying to bring in a whole pile of friction or a whole pile of decisions. So it's very simple. We'll be talking protein at every meal that we're already eating. We're looking at steps at every opportunity that presents itself throughout our day and training sessions that get locked into the same days every single week, attached to commitments that you can't move. So there's no new time slots. There's no I'll get to it this evening or tomorrow. There's no 5 a.m. wake ups. There's no reorganizing your life. It is your existing schedule becoming the foundation and essentially the scaffolding, I think is actually a good way of looking at it, that this new system grows on. Because habits that we attach to existing habits, it doesn't cost any willpower. Habits attached to nothing cost everything. How often have we been there where we've tried to New Year's resolutions? It is probably the most infamous example of it. We will all make these unbelievable statements and completely left field. They generally don't last. And it's not because, again, it was a bad choice. It was more so just that there was no foundation behind it. So it required a lot more conscious effort, a lot more conscious thought. And ultimately, if it didn't deliver a result quick enough, then we just revert to the norm. That is normal. That is typically what happens. So this is essentially the plan that you don't have to remember. And that is the only one that's going to survive a hard week. Something that is automatic, autonomous, that we doesn't rely on us having to consciously think, how do I need to do X, Y, or Z? And then this leads into phase number two, where we have your trigger maps. This is ultimately where we map specific moments that historically derail you. And I'm sure, as I said, we can all think of certain situations, scenarios, whether it's social, with family, work related, that pull us off track. And we just potentially don't have the contingency. We don't know how to actually work around it or work back from it. So what we need to essentially do is, and some good examples again, like we have the Sunday before a difficult Monday, deadline week, the complaint, like I said, I'll get to it tomorrow. Each one needs a pre-decided protocol. It's not just a vague intention that I'll just figure it out. A specific protein-led meal, a specific 20-minute session if we can't get 45 minutes done, a specific reset move, which I think is key. So when we catch ourselves falling into these patterns, we need to basically be aware of it, but we need to acknowledge it, and then we need to interrupt it. If we can catch it, acknowledge it, and interrupt it, then that gives us time to make a conscious choice that will better serve us. And this is the decision that is made once in calm and that we then repeat time and time again. And then it becomes automatically, or it becomes autonomous, I should say, that it just executes, it triggers when you need it. And likelihood is you all probably operate this way at your best in the other aspects of your life. But we just simply never think to apply this to our body and our lifestyle and our health. But we have proof of concept with everything else we do, because that is typically how the world works. It is typically how we get and achieve success in any aspect. And then this ties in quite nicely with phase three, which is your identity layer. This final shift is the deepest one. So you stop running this as like a fitness goal that you're just trying to stick to. You start running it as part of who you are at your core. So you are a man who operates at this standard in every area, including this one, and not at the exception of this one. Once this identity shift lands, that question changes. It becomes not only sticking to this, but who am I if I'm not running this? And that's the layer that makes it permanent. You are no longer trying to do this. You are someone who does it, right? And that is the difference. If we become that person, I'm sure we've all heard it. If we ever have had a goal or there's anyone we aspire to replicate or emulate, the best bit of advice they ever give is do what they do. So if we are someone who wants to look after our health physically and mentally, we need to start doing the things that that person does. And it's not rocket science, by all means. Obviously, there is the nuance of, well, how does it work from me to you to the next five people beside you? That is the magic question. But here is a good example of exactly what we've just discussed, the consistency breakpoint toolkit. So Aaron here was a heavy vehicle mechanic and manager. So before we worked together, he had tried a couple of different plans in 2 years. But again, each one had collapsed inside 3 weeks. So what we did here was we anchored the strength sessions to the same days every week. We locked them to days and times that he could not move. We gave him the same preference as he would a doctor's appointment, time with his family, whatever it needed to look like. we mapped his triggers. So for him in particular, there was the late night binge, the week that he would spend just catching up, and then the Sunday downtime before, again, a difficult Monday. And each one got a pre-decided protocol. This is exactly how we respond in these scenarios. So we have contingencies. And again, we all know we can have a perfect plan, and that's all well and good until it doesn't go to plan. I'm of the opinion if we have no plan, we're obviously going to be out of luck. If we have a solid plan in place, we can handle 20 or 30% that doesn't go to plan. Much less friction, much lower stress, and then a much smoother kind of integration to where it needs to go. So this system simply just stopped requiring him to decide. He was down 8 kilos in 8 weeks, and he kept it off through complaints, travel, holidays, and in his own words, for the first time, his health is not something that he has to think about. It is just what he does. So that is the system. It is the three keys, the performance nutrition method, where we calibrate, we anchor, we flex. We have the minimum effective dose protocol, where we compound, we have overload, and we have steps. Then we have the consistency breakpoint toolkit, which is the cherry on top, where we have anchor habits, we have trigger maps, and we have identity. So three keys, we have one system, and each key alone produces something, but all three together is what produces transformation, and I would say a lifelong change. So alongside this, the order does matter, to be quite honest. If you train hard before calibrating nutrition, you will plateau. If you fix nutrition without installing the self leadership and the consistency breakpoint toolkit, you will collapse in week four when the rota gets hard. So the three keys have to install in the right sequence. And this is what 12 weeks of one-to-one work is for. Anyone can read a book on calibration. Very few people can sequence the three keys in order around their specific week while staying out of their own way. That is the work. So here is what 12 weeks of running this system looks like in practice. You sleep better, you stop dreading the gym because it integrates seamlessly into your week. You're performing at a level you know you're capable of with energy at 4 p.m. that you have not had in years. Your family notices first, then your colleagues, then one day you look at a photo of yourself, and the person looking back is the version of you that has been buried under the demands. That is the outcome that we all should be working towards. That is not just weight loss. That is the man who has finally figured this out. Like we said, we need to become that person. That needs to be the life we live. So before we go any further, like, are you the kind of person willing to do what it takes to get it right? If yes, there is only one question left. Do it on your own or do it with help. So there are only two paths from here. We have the same 12 weeks, which will pass either way. To be honest, the only question is whether you spend them on what path. So path one, like we said, on your own. Path two, we have the Apex Accelerator, which is a 12-week one-to-one coaching with me. So on your own, you take the three keys from tonight, you apply what you can around your current life, you buy more books, more programs, more supplements, and you hope that this time is different. But the realistic outcome, as we know, is 3 to 4 weeks of progress, which then collapses the next time that life gets demanding. It is the same 12 weeks on the other path. The Apex Accelerator is calibrated to your specific schedule, weekly check-ins, daily audits, weekly adjustments, accountability, the consistency breakpoint toolkit built specifically for your trigger moments. Direct access for the hard weeks, realistic outcomes, 12 weeks from now, leaner, stronger, system on autopilot, the same time, but two completely different outcomes. So let me introduce you formally to the offer. The Apex Accelerator 12-week one-to-one coaching for high-performing men is personalized, it is direct, it is performance-based. And that is the most important aspect. For someone who has been where you are, we move through the different phases, we assess, we calibrate, we install, and then we lock in. So here's exactly what you get, is everything you need and nothing you don't. We have a performance nutrition method, we have a full body comp blueprint, physiology audit, we have an energy balance, personalized roadmap, calibrated to your specific schedule, and body composition. The minimum effective dose training protocol, where we have 2 to 4 sessions a week, progressively tracked, which is key. We have the full consistency breakpoint toolkit installation where we anchor habits, we have trigger maps, and we have an identity layer calibrated to your specific life. We then have weekly check-ins, daily audits with structured adjustments. It is tracked, streamlined, efficient, and every week we move one variable that matters. Body composition assessments, we assess and audit your sleep, recovery, performance protocols. And again, like I mentioned, direct access for the hard weeks when it matters most. So when life matters, when life implodes, as we know it does, when it kicks us up the ass, you get me personally on the phone. It's not just some chatbot, it is not a portal. And here, like I said, each key is partial alone. What breaks down when one is missing? So here's how the 12 weeks unfold. Weeks 1 to 2, typically we would have onboard and assess. We'd have a body composition baseline, full physiology audit, schedule analysis. We have calibration of every variable. From weeks 3 to 6, we install the system, performance nutrition and minimum effective dose go in. And the early wins will bring progress. Most importantly, it brings confidence. It starts to realign standards. From weeks 7 to 10, we have architecture, which is the consistency breakpoint toolkit installed, trigger maps deployed, identity layer engaged. And then weeks 11 to 12 is essentially a lock-in for life where the system is running on its own. We have maintenance protocols handed back to where we can then map out that next phase. So this is who you become. You become the man who has finally figured it out. You stop restarting every other Monday. You start operating at your standard, the standard that we know we are capable of in every aspect of life. I would say especially this one. So you become the example, not the man or the person who knows what they should do, but the person who actually does it, the person who lives it. We need to be a leader as we do. And look, a quick honesty moment, like it isn't for everyone. So honestly, if you want like a one-page meal plan you can follow without thinking, it's not for you. If you're someone who wants to do without making any changes whatsoever, it's not going to work, truthfully. And if you were looking for the cheapest option, again, it is not going to be the right fit. The Apex Accelerator is for those who are serious about getting this right once, with the right support and never having to do it again. So what I want to show you guys here, if we can get it working, is I want to just show you what is possible.
There are two factors that have helped me achieve that success and stay on point. The first one of those is the fact that it's educational. So Lee is in constant communication, terrific at detail, terrific at explaining why you're doing a certain thing, which helps my head. And I love the logic of that. I love the fact that we can have an agreed set of actions and I can see the expected outcome of that. Then it's on me to go and deliver that. But the education is there first and foremost. So you will learn, and I'm learning throughout the process. The second aspect of it, which I think is probably the most important, is the fact that this is enjoyable. So not just to the gym sessions fun, Lee will also give you advice and help you in areas outside of gym and outside of nutrition that I wasn't expecting. And that's terrific because that helps your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being. So you're ticking a lot of boxes there. So the fact that all that is bundled up into an enjoyable experience is terrific because if you enjoy something, you tend to want to do more of it. And you will do more of it.
So as we can see from Gary there, that is essentially the game that we play. So there are two bonuses available only to live attendees tonight, as you guys would know. So bonus one for everyone live right now is the Consistency Breakpoint Toolkit. This is the exact framework that I personally use with my private coaching clients. It is the practical framework that we use for the specific daily and pivot points that historically break consistency. So we know what this looks like. It is the willpower test, the complaint, the Sunday before Monday. And this will be sent to you guys. It'll be in your inbox within 24 hours of the workshop close. And then bonus number two is for anyone who books an assessment call in the next 48 hours. They'll get a metabolic assessment where I will ultimately personally build your maintenance, your deficit, and your protein for numbers. So this is the work that we do in week one of paid coaching, delivered before our first session. So here is exactly what to do right now. So text the word Apex to the number, which I believe you guys all have, which is 353-89493-7012 on the screen. right now while you're watching. I'll personally text you back within 24 hours to confirm your audit slot. And again, there is limited availability for this week. The 48-hour booking bonus only applies to calls booked within 2 days of this evening. So if you cannot text right now, just drop Apex in the chat and I will see it. And then, even more so, this is not a sales pitch, it is a performance audit. So, if you're even slightly curious, here's exactly what happens on this call. It is an audit where we map your specific situation. So, your schedule, your body, your previous attempts, your goal has 30 focus minutes. So, we identify what is in the way, specifically what has been breaking your plans and what needs to change first. And we discuss the path forward. If it is a fit, great, we leave with concrete next steps either way. And if not, then we make sure that you have directions, you have directives, and you can make things happen. You can get yourself moving as you need to. We only discuss the coaching if it is appropriate. So you're not getting pitched, you are getting a roadmap. Now, if we're not, like I said, if we're not a fit, you walk away with a clear roadmap and 30 minutes of personal time with someone who has been where you are and knows exactly what you are going through. So, like I said, text the word Apex on the screen to the number here, and I'll make sure and get back in touch with you. Again, you cannot text right now, just drop Apex into the chat, and we will take it from there. So I do want to stress again, it isn't a sales pitch. I know what it's like to be in your position, to have tried everything and just never having found what you needed. I also know what's possible and within touching distance here. So, like I said, all we do is we map out your situation, we get crystal clear on what's in your way, and make sure that this gets resolved as efficiently as possible. So, what I'm going to do now, we're going to tie it up quite nicely, is we are going to jump into any questions that any of you may have. So please, by all means, drop them in the chat and we will work through them. And if not, then that will bring us to a gracious end. By all means, if you don't have any questions,